Hello and welcome to the Winners Find a Way show. I am your host, Trent Clark. Another great episode. Get ready for my guest, Matthew Pollard. Matthew, how are you, buddy?
Mate, I am doing terrific. I'm ecstatic to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled you are here. Looking forward to Matthew and I actually are hitting the road a little bit this summer. We will be together in June in Michigan. Going to talk to some entrepreneurs with the EO folks. And I am super excited as Matthew's going to bring the noise here on the edge and talking about the books, talking about sales. It's going to be awesome as we invite everybody into Grand Rapids, Michigan with Matthew. So Matthew, tell people where they can find you if they're reaching for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm at MatthewPollard.com, but you can also go to the introvertsedge.com. I mean, there you can get, the first chapters of my book for free as well. My publisher hates me when I say that. You don't need to buy my books. You can get the first chapters at the introvertsedge.com.
Love it. Love it. Okay, so let's get into a little bit. People may have picked up on Matthew's got a slight accent. Matthew is an Australian living in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, of course, doing his thing from here, and author of these two fabulous books. Is it The Edge Introvert or The Introverted?
The Introverts Edge. The Introverts Edge. Yeah. And yes. Because the framing's important for me, right? Because I believe that introverts have an advantage when it comes to selling and networking, which is kind of counterintuitive. I think most people feel like they have to have that big gift of gab to succeed in those things. And a lot of small business owners feel because they're introverted, that's an inhibitor to them growing.
Yeah, I think it's extremely counterintuitive. From our DISC standpoint, right? We talk about that sometimes with the certainly the D and the dominance, and the E are the I, the influencers, and then the steadiness of the S's and the C's. S's and C's often introvert side get a bad rap, like, oh, those aren't salespeople, right? I hear that all the time. That is so common. It's almost weekly for me in my world of consulting. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about the Introvert's Edge, because I really think that thoughtful process is so important. And as a guy who's a gift of gab, quote unquote, it's hard to sit and be quiet and be a good listener when selling.
I think it's much harder for extroverts in the long run. And I'll say that. I mean, don't get me wrong. Extroverts with gift of gab, they do well initially. And for the longest time, they can survive and succeed because a lot of introverts don't know they can excel in sales. And by the way, for the people listening that are like, oh, I'm not going to hire an introvert, that'd be like saying, I don't want to hire Zig Ziglar. I mean, Zig Ziglar was an introvert. So, the most well-known sales trainer and performer on earth is an introvert. And if you're worried that introverts can't do small talk, let's talk about that. Oprah Winfrey is an introvert. David Letterman is an introvert. So, I mean, the introverts do excel, but what happens is that extroverts are great at winging things. And that's not a positive thing long-term because, of course, they don't excel at active listening and they don't excel at empathy. Those are both learnable skills, by the way. I think the problem is that introverts believe they can't sell, so they don't try. But sales systems, networking systems, public speaking systems, those are all things that introverts excel at because they hold onto it for dear life, because without it, we're terrible. And then over time, we get to become the best in the business. The problem is most people believe they can't sell or can't network, and therefore they don't try. And that's what my books really talk about. It's the fact that, I go as far as saying in my first book, you really could piece together a system as an introvert no matter what, and it would work for you. The problem is that as an introvert, the biggest thing that's going on in your head is, I can't do this, I can't do this. And that's got to go away because most introverts are amazing at sales. They just can't wing things, and that's what gets in their way.
Well, I think you're hit something really important, which is it's being said consistently, like, oh, I'm an introvert, I shouldn't be selling. That is a mantra that does live out there. Well, I think you touched on, which was really good, and you actually prove this methodology, is that selling and systems can be learned. You were a young man, 18, 19 years old, lose your data entry job after 3 weeks, right? And you're like, I got to go get a sales job because the only thing that's available is a commissioned only deal. So now if I'm going to survive and eat, pay my bills, pay my rent, make this deal, you're an 18, 19-year-old kid, right? And walk me through that process of what you're thinking and how you learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's just say if this didn't happen to me, then I wouldn't be teaching this stuff, and I'd probably still be doing a data entry role. And I think a lot of people listening probably have businesses because something happened to them. So they went and started a business of their own, or they just wanted to build a business that revolved around them, their family, and their life, not the other way around. And so they end up running a business and then realizing they have to sell. For me, I mean, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. I was super introverted. And for the video listeners, I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome, which means I put on this funny pair of colored lenses, and then miraculous, I could learn to read, but not like everyone else. I could start the process of learning to read. And so for me, the last 2 years of high school were tough. I got into the top 20% of my state, but I was exhausted. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So my family all agreed that I would spend a year finding myself to work out what I wanted to do, because going to university without having that in mind, the pain would be worth the gain. I knew I would spin out and wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
So I took a job doing data entry, right? I literally, when I speak from stage at events, I say I took a job at a real estate agency, and everybody looks at me, born salesperson, gift of gab, obviously. Then we were just looking to stamp anyone that's successful with the extroversion label. I'm like, no, I was the guy in the back office with the look on my face, like, don't speak to me. I'm here to find myself doing data entry. 3 weeks into that job, though, like, my manager pulls me aside and he's like, Matt, I am so sorry to tell you this. They're closing down this office. You're out of work. I mean, this was Australia at Christmas time, right? If you think of a place that's almost impossible to get work, it's Australia, right? Everyone goes off on holidays because it's summer at Christmas time on the 20th of December. No one comes back till the 15th or 20th of January. So here I am thinking, okay, my dad broke his back 80 hours a week trying to support the family. There is no way I'm going home without something lined up. So I pull out the classifieds, and there are literally only 3 jobs listed. And each one of them is called, which I didn't even know what that was until I picked up the phone and called the first one, commission-only sales roles. And when they explained to me what that was, I was like, you're kidding. So I was like, the first thing, sales was daunting, but commission-only, come on. But I applied for all 3 roles, and I got 3 job interviews. And I'm like, well, hang on a sec. Maybe they see something in me that I don't see myself. And then I actually got 3 job offers, and I walked in because I got 3 job offers to the first day of training with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. Like, I got 3 job offers. And the trainer's like, Matt, they hire everyone. Like, they've got a saying, you throw mud up against the wall, you see what sticks. So I was mud, which is not a fun saying when you realize that. And then I get 5 days of product training, not a single second of sales training. I get thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia. It's like 1,000 doors on each side. And I just go sell. I didn't even know what to say. They give me 5 days product training, and that's it. And that was my realization. So door 1, I was politely told to leave. And I say politely, which was a good thing, by the way, because shortly after that, I was sworn at. My personal favorite, though, was always getting told to get a real job. Like, this was the only job I could get. Door after door that happened until I got to my 93rd door, where I made about $70. And I remember being ecstatic because that was a lot of money at that time. But then I had this other realization. I got to do this again tomorrow, the next day, and the next. And I think for most of the audience listening at home or in their offices, they're probably thinking at that point, well, that's where I quit, or that's where most people would, which isn't untrue. Like 18 of my training group of 20 quit. They didn't come back the next day. But I decided that sales had to be a system. That was my thing. Like, because otherwise, without gift of gab, my year was going to be terrible. And I couldn't read a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book. It would have taken me a year to read that, let alone apply it. So I taught myself how to sell watching YouTube videos.
Wow. Man, I think this is a great example of learning. I think that kids get written off because special education, they have needs, they don't learn like everybody else. You got to wear your special glasses, and you're like, oh man, I am not keeping up with these juniors and seniors. In fact, I'm exhausted coming out of my, grade school work, my secondary education, because it's a ton of work. And yet here you're learning tons via video, right? And you're learning right away, like, oh, I'm picking this up right away, what they're saying, because this is a learning style that you're very, very adaptive to. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's probably the biggest learning out of this for me was a couple of things. We set these barriers to say, oh, I can't do that. We tell ourselves these amazing stories, which are getting in the way of us actually taking action towards fixing them. And it's so easy to create excuses because life isn't that uncomfortable. Like, I told myself that I couldn't go home and tell my father that I was out of work and I needed to do commission-only sales.
Yeah.
But my father would have accepted it. Let's face it, we're not exactly living in mud huts anymore, right? The world's a lot, it's a lot safer than it ever has been. In a lot of ways, life's not that tough. When I deliver these presentations I speak at a lot of EO events, and I talk about the fact that, at that point, most people would just assume that that's the way it's going to be. And they would constantly just hustle every day, hopefully relying on lady luck. And to me, that's not okay. But then a lot of people will buy $5,000 courses and say, that's going to fix my problem. It feels nice. But then when I tell them what I did instead, they're like, I would never have done that. But they didn't need to do it over the time frame I did it. And I'll just explain. I mean, I spent like every day, the decision I made is sales had to be a system. And where am I going to learn this system? Well, back then, YouTube just came out. So I typed in sales system. And what I noticed is all these videos came up, and I literally would spend 8 hours a day applying what I'd learned the night before. And then I rush home every night and I'd spend 8 hours learning the next thing or improving on what I worked on. Weekends, I'd spend 16 hours practicing. And for most people, I mean, of course, this doesn't sound fun and I get it, but every day I got better. Like I would be, 71 doors, then 46 doors, then 20 doors, then 9. Then I got it down to eventually closing a door every, I would literally make a sale every 3 doors. And literally my boss pulls me in. I remember it was about 6 weeks later. And I thought I'd done something wrong. Like he had this weird look on his face. I'm like, I'm going to get fired again. Like I've seen that face before. And like, I remember I was the quiet guy. Like I used to hand my paperwork in downstairs. I didn't even talk to anyone upstairs. All these boisterous sales reps talking about how they locked in that deal or how the market's getting tougher. I talked to no one. I kept to myself. And he had this puzzled look and he's like, Matt, we just got our national sales figures. And back then they used to get them about once a month. And he said, you're the number one salesperson in the company. And I mean, this was the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. This company employed thousands of commission-only sales reps all over the country, selling telecommunications, oil and gas, like just ridiculous. It took 6 weeks. And yet I've carried that success into everything else that I've done. This regimented, I agree that it's a system and I'll apply that system. I'm willing to do a short-term amount of pain for a long-term reward. I mean, now I teach people sales. I mean, went from scared to sell to eventually, I don't know why they did this, but they were like, you can sell. We're going to promote you to manage. I don't know why people think that you can sell so you can manage. I was terrible at management. I got given a team of 20. They all quit. I went back to YouTube to learn how to do that, and I got good at it. But most people say, well, I would never put in that amount of work for 6 weeks. Well, then do it over 6 months. Do it over 12 months. For most people listening here, they've spent a lifetime learning their functional skill, and then they fail to earn the money they deserve for one of 2 reasons. One is they're introducing themselves by their functional skill, which is nuts. They've kind of already lost at that point. They're fighting on price. Or they get a customer that's literally trying to buy. They're just so bad at it, and they fill the customer's head with jargon, like this fire hose of information, and they can't close the deal. And that is something that even if you put a small amount of dedicated effort for a period of 6 months, you would double the profit you're making. I mean, we're talking just offline, Trent, about, an accountant that literally went back and sold to his current clients. He put his prices up by 430%, and he sold to 82% of his current clientele just by learning a methodology and learning how to differentiate himself. Yet most businesses don't do that. They work so hard, feeling underappreciated and not making the profit they deserve.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it is amazing. And it sounds simple, right? It sounds simple on paper, but a plan, having a strategy, having a system, having a plan. And by the way, I kind of laughed about your YouTube reference because probably about 20 years ago, I remember watching Good Will Hunting, right? And he was the brilliant guy from Boston, right? Who goes, he's running around Harvard's, back school, yeah. And he's like, cost you $3.95 in fines at the public library. Like the information's all here. Like you don't need some special degree. Like the information's out there. If you're not going to get it, that's on you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, so I have different views on education. And what I mean by that is I had no money to my name, but I did have time. So YouTube, everything you'll ever need is on YouTube. And especially these days, the amount of content we have on Audible, you can do all of it yourself right now. I mean, we talk about EO, there are other membership groups as well. And so what's the benefit of that? What's the benefit of buying an online training? Well, if you make great money and what you're short of is time, then these systems regiment the learning so you can do it at speed. Some include additional support. Some organizations have forums and, different groups where they can help cut the learning curve and bounce ideas out so you can get out of your own head. But it drives me nuts when somebody reaches out to me and they're like, I have got no money and I need your help. And I'm like, no, what you want is my help because what you're doing otherwise is falling into busy procrastination. And that drives me nuts. Like one of the things that I do a lot of times when I speak at events is I literally say from stage, because everyone in their head is like, I'm either not going to do this or I'm going to hire him to do this. I'm like, you don't need to hire me. What you need to do is you need an accountability partner. And I literally match them up in the room with somebody. And I say, this person is your accountability partner. Let's do the exercises together. And this is when you're going to reach back out to them. And I get them to schedule it in their calendar, because those are the two things. You need to know what to do, and YouTube can teach you that, but you also need to hold yourself accountable to actually doing it. And the truth is, most people just don't do that. So I could have spent the next 6 months saying, oh, I'm going to learn sales and reading a few books, but not actively applying it. But instead I went and I practiced it and I applied it, and therefore YouTube worked. And that's the thing that drives me nuts. A lot of the people that I meet, they're either struggling to make six figures or they're making a good six-figure income relying on the feast and famine that comes with referrals, which a lot of times is the best type of sale they can get. And that's just because their marketing doesn't work. But they don't improve their packaging. They don't improve the way they sell. And they say that they want to, so they read a book. They might even hire a consultant or buy an online program. And then they kind of shallowly do it, and then they go back to what I call busy procrastination. They do the busy work of their business that feels like they're moving forward, but all they're really doing is hiding their head in the sand because they don't want to do the things that are uncomfortable. And the truth is that it's usually uncomfortable. Like I say all the time, like if you start with sales, you've already lost, because if they see you as an insurance salesperson or as an accountant or as a language tutor, well, then they're comparing you against everybody else. Like we were talking offline. Like if you say, I do DISC assessments, well, then people just go and say, well, everybody does DISC assessments. Let's go shopping for the cheapest DISC assessment provider, because you're literally defining yourself as milk, right? There's nothing different between me and everyone else. And even most milk brands differentiate better than most service providers do.
Yeah, it's interesting how you frame the information, right? I've been in this game of data. First of all, you made a perfect description of hyper learning, right? Taking all this content, taking people to experience it, like funneling it in, and like that's my value of the entrepreneurs and the entrepreneur organization, EO, is like it's hyper learning. I see this in the military. Like I'm gonna go to SEAL training. Oh, you're gonna get really good in like 8 weeks at something, right? Like it's gonna be crazy, right? Pro sports is very similar. Where my environment, where I came from, is like all these athletes coming in, the best in the world who've worked at the highest level, and they go, no, that doesn't work. No, that doesn't work. No, that doesn't work. Like these work. This worked. I like that. Click. And you're like, bam, bam, bam. And you're like, man, and everybody checks their ego at the door. And then you go in and you just hyper learn and you're like, dang, man. And then when you come out of the room after a few weeks, everyone goes, holy crap, man, you just went and got a lot better. Like, yeah, I figured out the system, man. Like, it's crazy. And you don't realize it because everybody's good inside the room. And so you're like, oh, man, am I really growing? It's kind of like working out, right? Where you work out, you're like, I don't see any changes, like, and then all of a sudden, someone you haven't seen in a couple months goes, holy crap, Matt, what are you doing, man? You're doing great. Like, this is incredible. And you're like, yeah, damn right, man. I've been putting stuff in every day, like the work. But the other thing I got out of your message there was, I've been in this game a long time. I am a very well paid accountability partner. I've got all these exposures into these high environments, right? And people hire me to guide them through these stuff and double their companies. And they're like, let's do that. But like at the end of the day, like, you know what you need to do. I'm directing the steps, and then I'm going to hold you accountable to what you said you were going to do. Like, and then we got the software to back that up, right? And so it's like, man, like you could do this yourself, but you and I both know most people don't. Why?
Well, so I think there are two things, and I know your podcast loves sports analogies. So we
do love that.
So firstly, a lot of them believe that they can't. Right. So it's like the 1 minute mile, and you're probably going to know the exact person I'm talking about, but nobody could do the 1 minute mile. And then all of a sudden kids at high school were doing it.
Yeah. The 4 minute. Yep. 4 minute mile. Yep.
Sorry, the 4 minute mile. Correct. So, and you'll find that I'm pretty bad at sports. So I'm going to do
that's good.
But the concept was no one believes they can. So a lot of, especially, and let's talk about real functional service providers, like a lot of the groups, like you think about a managed service provider or an accountant or someone that sells insurance. They're like, oh, what I do is complicated. It needs to be, I need to educate the client so that they can make the best decision. No, that's what you're telling yourself
Yeah.
so that you don't need to learn sales. And there are two reasons you're telling yourself that. One is because you think that the customer's job is to make the decision on the direct. You're the expert. Like the biggest thing that your job is to decide what the customer needs and get them out of their own way to buy your stuff. But because you don't know how to do that, you're going to educate the client, which only gets the client in their own way. And then they're going to buy a product or service from somebody else that service isn't as good, probably, just because you weren't able to do it. So the truth is that if you want to serve your clients, you need to learn how to sell. But then the second thing is that once they believe that they can, the second one is to allocate time. And this is what I've seen with a lot of small businesses, especially small businesses, is that when they're doing the accounting work, they're getting paid. When they're doing the other work, when they're working on things behind their business, they appropriate that as good, valuable time. But because, and it's kind of a hybrid, they believe that they're going to learn sales in the room. They're going to believe that their networking is transactional, so they're just going to do it in the room. They don't allocate time to planning and preparation for that. And because of, and they see it as standing still. So their brain kind of tells them, we're not running forward. We're not running forward. And because of that, they feel uncomfortable with doing those activities. A lot of times I'll say, like, marketing's not that complicated. If you sit in a room for a couple of hours, you will literally catapult forward. But most people in those couple of hours feel like they should be doing other things. And if I could just to bring this all the way back to goal setting, it's because most people have a scattergun approach to goal obtainment. It's funny when I tell people to set goals, and this is an exercise I do for everybody that before I work with them or before they, even if they work, actually, I give it away. I give this exercise away for free in the free video implementation training in the back of my book. But I literally tell them to set 3 business goals, 3 personal goals, 1 selfish to themselves, because that'll drive them. And it's like, all you hear is, I'm going to make $1 million in this business. I'm going to do this other thing. Like, that's overwhelming. You're not going to do any of it. So most people sit down and write goals every year or every couple of years, and they never hit any of them. And they're used to just resetting them the following year. So what I do is I say, forget about all of that. Set 3 business, 3 personal, and keep them super hyper-focused. And let's bring the reins in. Like, don't say you're going to hit $1 million in the next 12 months. And firstly, stop talking about revenue. No one cares. Let's talk about profit, right? But then secondly, don't say you're going to hit $1 million profit if you've only made 27,000 this year. And sure, it feels nice to say you're going to do that in a year and a half, but you're not. Let's focus at getting to 56,000 in the next couple of months. Knock that out of the park, then do the next thing. It keeps you hyper-focused, and an accountability partner can help you do it, and it feels realistic, and you can make an actual plan. And on that, don't say you're going to master sales, you're going to master networking, you're going to master leadership, and you're going to create all SOPs for your entire organization in the next 3 months. That is ridiculous. Go down one rabbit hole, pick one thing to master, dominate in that, come out at the end of that, celebrate the attainment of that goal, and let everybody celebrate with you, and then go down the rabbit hole in the next thing. You will do so much more by focusing on one thing at a time to excel at than focusing on 6 things and achieving none of them.
Yeah, and I like this. Let's use your accountant, just your example of this company, right? Realization rate. That's what an accountant, big KPI. Let's get some realization rate. So, all right. So if we get a realization rate from 88 to 90%, like, yeah, we made 2% better realization. Like, what's the equivalent of that 2% versus a 432% increase in your billing? I mean, like, I'd love to do that number for them to go, hey, stop walking over dollars to pick up dimes.
Do you know what's funny? I actually have an exact example of that. So one accountant I'm thinking of, he called me freaking out. He closed one. So he was going back to his previous clients, and he closed 1 out of 4, which meant 3 of his clients said, no, I don't like the idea of this new plan. I mean, he put his prices up by 430% though. So he's freaking out. And I said, hold on, I'm confused. Why are you upset? And he's like, well, I only closed 1 out of 4. And I said, let me explain this for you. You've put your prices up by 430%. So what I'm hearing is I'm making this more revenue, way more profit, and I only have to do 25% as much work. How is that a bad thing? Now, we ended up getting it to 82% closure rate, but, which actually was too high, because now he's still, like most accountants that I see, are at 150% capacity, but they're earning less. I mean, they're earning nothing, pittance. And their number one problem is I can't keep up with the work, but I also can't afford to put my prices up on my clients. And it's because they don't think like business people. But the key thing, and I think that the biggest thing that we need to get to is that most people, they struggle to put their prices up. They struggle to get that 2% gain because they're like, oh, other people in my industry aren't doing that. Or, I feel bad about it because they're going to go and they'll say, well, I'll just go somewhere else. So if you don't learn how to articulate your unique value, then of course, revenue will go up and so will the amount of stress you have. Profit usually goes down, not up, as you start to get to that capacity point because you're starting to hire other people, they leave on you, you start burning capital. And that's why most people end up in a plateau or start to go down. So for most people, let me put it this way, if you still call yourself an accountant or an insurance person and you don't have a way of differentiating yourself and you don't speak to a niche of clients that see you as the only logical choice, then you're always going to be fighting on price. You're always going to be talking about the revenue that you get because it's embarrassing to talk about the amount of profit you have.
I'd like to know, I'd like to think that like in America, and I know, you're relatively new to America. I mean, you've been here, a quarter of your lifetime. And I want every kid to go get 92 no's before their first yes. Like, I want every kid to understand, because I think right now we're doing a disservice, Matt. Like, I see a lot of people going, oh, hey, be an entrepreneur, start your business. It's easy. Like, hold on, man. Like, first of all, there's going to be a lot of effort. It's going to be a lot of work. Like, it's going to be great. It can be awesome. You can do this. I know you can apply rapid growth. You're an expert. So you can apply rapid growth to almost anything, right? And it's there for the taking. But there's a learning curve. Like, you are going to have to get in this and work. And I feel like, like you said, oh man, how many quit after the first 10 no's? They were like, oh, this doesn't work. It's not going to work.
Forget 10. No one's doing 10 no's. Most people give up on 2 or 3. I mean,
yeah.
The people listening, how many networking events they've actually gone to before they decided they couldn't network, right? Or how many actual sales conversations before they decided they just didn't have the gift of gab? No. Yeah. Let's go out and sell, or let's just keep doing it or learn the system. They just give up. The truth is that, the 93 doors is absolutely helpful, but not without planning and preparation. And I'll give you an example. I think the best example I can give you is that going in and beating your head up against the wall is not helpful. Like, a lot of introverts say, I'm not going to learn a sales system because I just, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to sell, right? But so then they go and wing it, and that's a lot more painful. And then they spend a lot of time writing proposals and following people up. That's a lot more stressful and a lot more time. Like, I'll give you an example. There's a guy called Nick Jensen. He was an insurance salesperson, and he had read my networking book. And he's like, Matt, look, I try to be interested before I try to be interesting. Like, but I sit talking to them, and eventually they're like, oh my gosh, Matt, Nick, I can't believe I've been speaking to you for 20 minutes, and I can't, I don't even know what you do. What is that? And he says, I sell insurance. Well, it doesn't matter what you say after you say you sell insurance. They know that the next thing is, do you have insurance? Do you need insurance? And their eyes explode. And they're like, how do I get away from this person? Like, we've all been in that situation. Like, it's horrible. And he said, well, how do I say what I do differently? And there are 2 things. I said, firstly, I feel like, and for the people that haven't started their own business yet or have started a business, and let's face it, a lot of introverts are very practical and logical minded. So this is a problem. And then a lot of extroverts, when you tell them set goals, you find out that they inherited those goals from their mother, their father, I don't know, drunk roommate they had in college. They just hear these things, they run after them. So the biggest thing for me is, you can create a rapid growth business out of anything. There's nothing worse than a rapid growth business with customers you can't stand, a business you don't like. So focus on your passion and why, the mission behind what you want to do. And people are like, oh, can I really make money out of that? Well, you need to separate these 2, because otherwise you just end up saying, I sell insurance. So Nick is a classic example of this, because I said, he comes to me and he's like, what can I do differently? And I said, well, firstly, you said you sell insurance. Like, I need to understand the passion behind this. Like, because otherwise you go into a networking event. Like, think about me. If I said, oh, I'm a sales trainer, they would literally look at me like I'm one step above a scam artist. If I said I'm in marketing, they're like, oh, I do marketing. How much do you cost? And I'm like, all right, so now I'm talking about price. I just met them. And it's the classic elevator pitch, right? I do this for this group of people, even if they have this common problem, which basically is all I centric, which basically sounds like, hey, I do this thing and I'd love to hire you. I'd love to, work with you because, if I got you as a client, that would money, I'd be able to buy a new car and I really need a new car. Like, it's so transactional. It's horrible. But if you've got no passion and mission behind it, like, what are you really doing? So I said, Nick, like, why did you get new insurance? And he's like, well, I really felt like people need insurance and I would love to help people with insurance. And I said, like, all people equally? And he said, yeah, all people. Now, I never believe that, by the way, because there's no way you could equally care about helping everybody. And truthfully, you couldn't equally help everybody the same way because everyone's got unique talents, backgrounds, past experiences. So I said, all right, Nick, let me give you an example. Somebody that earns $50,000 a year versus somebody that earns $250. Which group do you want to help most? He said, well, obviously the 250. I'm like, why? He said, well, they make more money. They can buy more insurance. I'm like, that's not passion, Nick. That's just, I want more money. I said, let me ask you a different question. Imagine I was a guy that studied like crazy in a poor neighborhood to get a scholarship to go to Harvard, graduated from Harvard. Now I earn $250,000 a year, C-level executive with 10 staff versus somebody that said, you know what, forget high school. I'm going to drop out, saves up, starts their own business. Now they make 250. They've got 10 staff of their own in their own business. Which group do you want to help the most? And he said, well, the business owner. I'm like, why? This guy's hustled to get to Harvard. Like, he's made something of himself. And his response was, I just think they deserve it more. And I said, tell me about that, because that's not everybody's belief. It's your belief. And he said, well, I had this grandfather, and my grandfather literally did start his own business, and he prioritized everybody else over himself in his farm that he built. And he said he got to a certain point where he got unwell and he had to sell the farm. He couldn't support it anymore. He said, I just watched him fade away in front of a television for the last decade of his life. I just, I hated seeing that. I'm like, you sell insurance. Like, the guy didn't die. Like, how could you connect that to insurance for me? He's like, well, I know about these insurance products that high cash flow businesses can buy. They can put in their cash flow and it can sit in there. They can get a high yield interest rate. They can move into investments. I was blown away at how much he knew about this. Like, no insurance company knows as much about this as he did because he cared about it. And the reason for that is because of his grandfather. And I said, how would you like to get up every day to help these high cash flow businesses, the hustlers of the world that create something out of nothing, use their high cash flow that they don't usually do anything more than put in a really low yield bank account, learn how to leverage that into these high yield returns so they could invest into other things? I would love that. So what we did is we niched him down to high cash flow businesses, and we started with just farmers because that's what his grandfather had. And we called him the Hustle Lifeguard, right? For the hustlers of the world, and lifeguard, right? Signifying those people that are hustling every day, but their finances are kind of drowning, right? And he, helps breathe oxygen back into them. And he would go to networking events and he would introduce himself as the Hustle Lifeguard, which after talking to someone for 20 minutes, they're like, well, I kind of feel like I should ask more questions because you've been letting me talk about myself. But secondly, what the hell's that? So they ask the question and then he responds with, his passion and mission for service, and then leverages a story. Like when I say hello to someone and I talk to them and they ask me what I do, I say I'm the rapid growth guy. And when they ask me what that is, I say, well, one of the things I love more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to start a business of their own. But what I find more often than not, I just hate seeing this, is they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, feeling like people only care about one thing, price. Do you know anyone like that? Now, if you know how to research, you should know what event you're going to. Your avatar should be there. And if you look up the attendees, like connect with them in a LinkedIn beforehand. So you actually feel like you've got planned meetings. So of course the person is like that because I've found my avatar before I go. So I then explained that I'm on a mission to help introverts like that realize that they can obtain rapid growth, but not by getting better at their functional skill. Instead, by focusing on just 3 things outside the scope of their functional skill that can really allow them to build a business around them, their family, and their life. Then I'll tell them a story. See, the difference is I didn't even tell you what I did. I didn't mention anything about sales, anything about marketing, because the truth is people don't care if I say, put this iPhone in the middle of your desk and you will create rapid growth. They just want to make a great income doing what they love. All I did was, instead of saying I talked about the change I want to see in the world and the mission that I'm on. That difference means everything, but it comes from saying, what am I truly passionate about? And everybody got to choose what they do. They did it for a reason, but then they got practical and they forgot that that reason is the reason that should be driving their marketing. And that's all they need to segue. Where's my passion and mission behind this? How do I say, what are the unique things that I can do outside the scope of my functional skill to help these people? And then how can I create a message for that? Once you have that, everything else is easier.
Love it. When we talk about your background, this is unique, like, because you go into the school of hard knocks and you were just growing. And if people don't know this about you, you know, you're a guy who's created 5 multi-million-dollar different businesses before you're 30 years old. And so, and I love this, that at 27, you decide, you know, like, hey, maybe I should go get educated. And so you head off for an MBA, which most people don't know here, that someone with an undergrad can go get an MBA. Like, you didn't go to college. No, I know. I've been working and building businesses and building value and contributing to these organizations and to other organizations and to my people that work for me. So you have all these experience of contribution. And this MBA program says, of course, Matt, you're in, dude. Like, executive level MBA, let's do it. It's a 4-year program. Get in here, guy. Let's do this together, because an MBA program is really much more real world. Come alongside and start learning business in a functional way, as opposed to our typical undergrad would just kind of lecture, speak at you. Hey, this is the information you need to know.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
So there are a couple of things in that question. So, I mean, firstly, you know, my last business was an educational business, and I'm like, I better go and get one, right? It's inauthentic to not have an education. And look, the world's never worked for me, like never worked for me. I couldn't read, nothing worked, right? I then fell into sales. So I've always lived my life by, and literally I will say this, and I'll come to a couple of quotes. So firstly, and this is an NLP theory of assuming you're responsible for everything horrible that happens to you. And I know that sounds terrible, but if you're not in control of it, if you don't take responsibility and you're at effect, it's like, poor you, I can't survive. As opposed to, it's my fault, what can I do to fix it? So firstly, saying that. The second thing is to then live in what if thinking, right? So literally saying, what if there was a way that I could learn to get out of this? Or what if there was a solution? And for that, you know, I mean, you're from Michigan, so let's use a Henry Ford quote, right? If you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're right. So if you believe that there is a solution, there will be one, and there always is. And I think that the thing for me is taking responsibility, realizing there's always another way, came from the fact that there always had to be, or my life would have been terrible, right? Most people, their lives kind of worked. So it's actually harder for them to take these two things on. But if you can say, anything that I can't do, take responsibility, then assume there's a path forward for you. Well, then it comes down to the willingness to do the work. And if you're not willing to do the work and you just want to go back to what's comfortable, what do they say? Getting out of your comfort zone. That's where the magic happens. Sure. But actually doing the work over a longer scale. And that's why having very structured goals is really important. So for me, I need to get an education. Okay. But I'm not going to do an undergrad, because everything I'd heard about undergrad is it's the learning and regurgitation of information you're never going to care about once you graduate. And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing that. I want to do an MBA. And everyone said, well, you can't do an MBA, Matt. I mean, you don't have an undergrad. And it was like all these people telling me why I wasn't good enough to go and do an MBA. And I'm like, well, how about that? I'm going to go find a way to do an MBA. And then I discovered there were 2 universities that did an executive education. And, you know, and the requirement was, one, you had to do a test, which basically meant you had to do this basic IQ test to prove you're exceptional. And then the second one was you had to have 8 years of senior leadership experience. And I could have assumed as a business owner, that wasn't senior leadership. I was running my own business. And then so I applied anyway, because again, I took responsibility. I assumed that it was going to work out. And funnily enough, it did. So what happened was I applied, I got accepted, and I got to do it. And I got to learn, I would say that qualification was wonderful, because I got to learn how to apply theory, which is what an MBA focuses on, rather than regurgitate theory. And funnily enough, when I met my now wife and I said that this is the qualification that I have, she was like, well, you would never have been able to get to do that in America. And I said, okay, I can imagine, like, I don't know enough to say I could have, but I also don't want to assume that that's not the reality. And I bet you this is going to come up from time to time. So I looked it up. And it turns out that my university is also the sister university of the University of Texas, which also offers an executive education program with the same rules and to get in. So the thing is that people create these stories for why you can't, or they do what everybody else does. And for me, I just live this life that I have to do everything differently because the way other people do it doesn't work for me. And I think that that's actually a negative for other people. I've got, one of the quotes that I coined, which I think is really helpful in this point, is, the adversities we face seed the success of our future. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people haven't faced specific adversities that I faced when I was younger, which means they never got to take responsibility, say, what if there was a solution, and then take responsibility, because life wasn't really that tough. And that means they've had a little bit of pain for a really long period of time, as opposed to a lot of pain in a really short period of time, which is what I experienced.
Well, I think one of the things I love Stephen Covey's quote, you are responsible for your results, right? And we were just talking about that this week, a fellow client of mine, and man, it's like we expect folks to take responsibility. We want our team members. I want to surround myself with winners, right? Our show, winners find a way. Winners, when shown data they are losing, find a way to win. I want solutions-driven, solutions-minded people who are like, hey, I'm not sure this works. And your mind is going through this as an undergrad, I don't think serves me. So let me find a way if I can just go directly to the MBA. And yet, here's all this information out there that centers around that says, oh, no, you can't do that. Oh, no, you can't do that. And we believe it. Like there's so many people who believe, oh, you're an introvert, you can't sell. Oh, well, I believed it because somebody said it. And I don't know who has the street cred that I should believe that, right? Like, it's like, well, I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Like, yeah, I don't know if I should believe you that an introvert can't sell because you've got this, what background to tell me that's true? But we do believe it as truth. Why are we doing it, Matt?
Well, so the thing is that we love our little stories. They mean that we don't have to work very hard. Like, that's the thing. Like, life's convenient. Like, I've got a choice that I can tell myself the story that I can't do an MBA because I don't have an undergrad, which means, let's be honest, I get to watch a ton more Netflix. Or I could not tell myself that story, find a way, which means I need to go through all the work of applications. It's just easier to say. I mean, what's that? I think it's Robert Kiyosaki that said the reason why there aren't more entrepreneurs out in the world is because people would prefer to have a very mediocre life where people treat them poorly than have unpredictability in their life, right? And running your own business has a lot of variability. And for a lot of people, they can't take it. For me, I live in this world of what if. Like, a lot of times when somebody says, oh, there's no way to do that, I'm like, what if there is a way? And that's just my natural go-to.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of people, especially like you think about, people that are in insurance, life, isn't that hard. They hustle, they get a little bit of insurance deals, they get enough to, keep the lights on and okay living. Accountants, yes, they're at 150% capacity. Yes, they go to a networking event. The moment they say I'm an accountant, the people, switch off and they're like, how do I get away from this person? But yeah, and every now and then somebody says I need an accountant, and it kind of works. People are willing to accept this subpar because they're not willing to do what other people aren't willing to do. And because of that, they get to live very mediocre lives like everyone else. And I mean, I know that, you're a big fan of EO and so am I. And funnily enough, I actually started speaking at a lot of EOs more recently because I got picked up to speak at a ton of corporations because The Introvert's Edge, my book, has this really good chapter on storytelling. And everybody has books on storytelling. Mine's a chapter. And my joke is that we introverts overcomplicate everything, right? So, I wanted to make one chapter instead of a book so we could actually apply it. But it meant me doing all these sales kickoffs. And I just got listed by Selling Power Magazine as the #1 sales kickoff speaker in the world, which is great, but I love speaking at small business. So I then went to the effort of going out of my way to source EOs so I could speak at them, even though, sales kickoffs pay a lot more. I love that piece, right? So I love doing it. But what's interesting is that I don't create excuses and I focus on what I want, not what's convenient. And I think it's really the stories that we set ourselves and the narratives that we tell that really get in our own way from taking action and doing what we want to do. I could be here on this call, telling people how amazing it is to do all these sales kickoffs and how I'm making all this money and then getting off and going, oh gosh, I got to do another sales kickoff. I hate my life, as opposed to doing what I absolutely love to do. I feel that people need to say, what would bounce me out of bed every morning I mean, because that's the thing. Like, yes, I've created 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. I didn't say that I was happy in every one of them. There was some that I was printing money and they made me miserable. So the thing that I would say is I literally, like, I hope people can understand the energy that I'm putting into this, but it's because I love this. I love doing exactly this. But the problem is, and I'm going to come back to one specific thing that I think is really important. We've got to stop lying to ourselves. And when you break through an adversity, you have to be honest about it so you can help others. And what I mean by that is I could quite easily say, I did my MBA and everybody would assume that I did an undergraduate. But instead, I openly will talk about the fact that I skipped it, not as a point of pride, but I want other people to know that they can do that too, because I actually will say that I'm a much better business owner now because I did my MBA, right? Where there were things I didn't know that I thought I knew, and I've probably saved or made a ton more money because I did it. But I wouldn't have got any value from an undergrad. Now, on top of that, I will say there's a lot of introverts that will say, and funnily enough, so I spoke at the AAISP Leadership Summit, which imagine all the best senior leaders in sales, the best in the business, and they're all there. And I did a survey of all of them beforehand, whether they were introverted or extroverted. And you should have seen some of the responses. I was introverted, but don't worry, I'm extroverted now. Like, firstly, what's wrong with being introverted? And secondly, how do you think it's something you can change?
Yeah.
And what it is obviously an introversion is just this, where you draw your energy. You draw your energy from being by yourself. You're an introvert. If you draw your energy, it doesn't mean you can't sell, right? But if you draw your energy by being an extra out with people, you're an extrovert. Now, this podcast is going to take far less energy than 150 podcasts ago. Why? I have a system. There's less angst. I have a more regimented system. I know what I'm saying. My first sale took a lot more energy than my millionth sale. But that doesn't mean I'm now more extroverted. It means that I'm an introvert that has a strong system. And I think what happens is people think that introversion is something they have to get away from. It's like a disease that they have to, find the cure to. And the truth is, this applies to everything. If you're an introvert that's learned to sell, be honest, you're an introvert that now has a system for selling. And by the way, if that system is behaving more extroverted, that's only going to last half as long. That's going to feel really inauthentic. But if you've found a process, tell people you're an introvert that you've learned to sell, right? And by the way, also, if you're an extrovert that thinks you've become more introverted since COVID, that also is not true. You can't change who we are. We've got to stop telling ourselves this fake news and say, what is it that I want? If I don't have the competency, what would be a path to get that competency? And then get out of your own way, forget about busy procrastination, stop telling yourself stories and take responsibility for it and just do the work. And I feel that people don't do that. And as a matter of fact, I'll go one step further. For those people that like the concept of Nick's story, the concept of coming up with the hustle lifeguard, the rapid growth guy, finding your niche, like if you're just selling and you're not differentiating at all, again, you don't need to hire me for this. Just go to matthewpollard.com/growth, download that template. There's a 5-step template that will tell you how to create your own version of the unified message and discover your niche. Don't call me for help. Reach out to somebody else that you know that is, and if they haven't listened to this podcast, get them to listen to this podcast and say, I will spend an hour helping you do this if you spend an hour helping me do this after listening to this podcast. And spend 2 hours together, and you will find that, I did this at the National Freelance Conference. 200 people in the room, 97% of the people walked out saying they had a unified message that will excite people to want to know more and a niche of willing to buy clients. The whole session was 90 minutes long. It's the saddest thing in the world. This stuff works, just people don't spend time doing it.
That's awesome. So a couple of things that you've been challenged with in your life. It always hasn't been perfect, right? I mean, Matthew, plenty of challenges along the way. As a young guy, you're with a group. I mean, by the way, you're a young guy now, in my opinion, by the way, and you look younger. So I'm going to out you right here. Most people don't know that Matthew Pollard's almost 40 years old now. And, even though you look 27 still, it's impressive. So, but you're a young guy in your 20s, and you're on your second or third company. You have a group outing, and someone of a madman attacks you in a bar, unprovoked, a drug, induced kind of person, and you've got to, take all this abuse to your face, over 25 stitches to your face, and you've got to be a young-looking guy going out and doing sales, and now basically trust is off. I mean, like, I don't know what you look like coming in and trying to talk to somebody at this point. You know, how do you reinvent yourself at this point, knowing, man, I don't know how I'm going to bring these people right to the pain point and get this conversation going without them being distracted by what's happened to me. And, and there's probably a lot of questions, but there's also a trust issue. Talk to me through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, let me preface with one thing first. For people listening to this is something I've not actually shared very much on podcast. Well, actually, I've never really shared it outside maybe one other podcast. And the reason I'm saying this is I want people to notice the difference between some of the answers I've given in the past that are really planned and prepared, and this introvert trying to do something off the cuff, because you'll realize very quickly I'm perhaps a little bit less polished in this answer. So the answer is, I mean, this was tough for me, because if you're talking about a guy, I mean, I had really bad acne. I mean, I told you about a presentation where I show a photo of me at my sister's wedding. And it's, you want everything to be perfect for your sister's wedding, but all the photos had me with really bad acne. I mean, I struggled to talk to anybody, and then I was in door-to-door sales, right? So
yeah,
that was really tough for me. But what I did is, through the process of developing this system, I developed some confidence, and I became, much more innerly confident that if I just followed the system, it wasn't about me, and I could sell. But that system that I fostered was really very much about developing trust and rapport with people, having people believe me that they could trust me. This kid has their best interests at heart. And we'll talk about the event in a second, but then all of a sudden I have 26 stitches to my face, and I look like I was in a bikie gang, and I trust was out the window. So I had to really rebuild my entire sales system in a way that leveraged it leveraged information storytelling, which is what I learned. Storytelling, when I deliver keynotes on storytelling, I help people realize that the reason I deliver all of my keynotes where I start with a story is when you tell a story, and I don't mean like the business stories you do, like case studies, customer wanted this, so we gave it to them. I'm talking more, let's be honest, the theatrical masterpiece of how you and your wife met, right? I know my wife and I, we removed certain elements, we've added certain elements, and, embellished a little bit. And we're like, now, I say this, my wife says this. I mean, we look at each other, we're like, that's how we met. And everyone's like, wow. It wasn't always a wow story, right? It's become better. And I think everyone has that. I'm talking stories like this. But when you practice and plan those stories, the thing you have to understand is that it actually synchronizes your brain with the listener's brain. And what that means is that you create artificial rapport. It activates the reticular activating system of a person's brain, creates artificial rapport that you can leverage into real rapport. And so I had to learn to leverage storytelling in order to foster the trust I naturally got by looking like a trustworthy kid. But yeah, it was but I had to learn that. I mean, I really just got my confidence, and I felt like I was still a little bit unsure of myself. And I would say there's some behaviors that I'm kind of embarrassed about now, because I was earning amazing money, and I created this fake ego about myself at that point, because I still kind of was unsure about myself, like any 20-year-old kid. But I was finally starting to find my feet. And then I was at a company function, and this was, I had about 50 staff back then. And two of the people that we had were contractors. They were from Denmark. They were backpackers, and they just came to work with us for about 2 years. And they got engaged, and we ran a company function to celebrate it. And it was in a back room, private event. And in Australia, we had this really bad, it was actually two things happening at once. So one is we had this drug problem around, it was called ICE. And I'm not sure if the translation applies here, but, people were having this, and it just caused them to go crazy. Like my brother-in-law's works in ICU as a nurse. And these were people that didn't want you to remove their ICE hit because they were so into it. You have to have 6 security guards hold them down. And then at the same time, there was all these glassings that were happening. And that meant, smash the glass on the bar and stab people with it. And I actually became the victim of both of those things at the same time. So we had a company function in a private room, and they had this person on camera that had been there for hours. He obviously was drinking, but he was under influence of something else, just based on his demeanor, apparently. But he just stormed in to into the room that we were in. He'd smashed the glass on a bar before he came in, and he stabbed me in the face with it. And I was like 3 millimeters or 5 millimeters from my eye, or I would have had a glass eye, and I got 26 stitches across the side of my face. So here I was, finally getting my confidence at a company function, and then all of a sudden, my job, I still would take salespeople out and show them how easy it was, give them the system. Now I've got 26 stitches to the side of my face. I look like a common thug, and I have to teach people as well as build my own confidence. It was a lot. But again, I went, not how could getting hit in the head with my glass be my fault? But I had to take responsibility with how can I fix my sales system? Because this system that I had that developed relationship no longer serves me. And I had to say, how can I make that my problem? And then that's where I discovered telling much stronger stories to generate rapport. And then, I found that method now helps me so much more, because that's the method that leads to me speaking to all these sales kickoffs, because, I'm literally showing people the framework of story that's a lot more about the actual characters in the story, making the decision maker the hero. And most salespeople just want to brag about themselves when they're telling a story, and it's a case study. So it's actually been one of the single most, when I speak at small business and corporate events, if I'm speaking at small business, I talk about rapid growth, and then I say, okay, let me give you one practical thing you can apply today out in the field. And everyone's like, it's going to take 8 months to learn story. I'm like, no, we're going to do it right here today. And I'll even transform somebody's story from stage so they see that it takes minutes. And it's a totally new methodology. And all of it came from getting hit in the head with a glass.
Yeah. So it's one of those things, like, I think that people appreciate that, while in the moment it's awful. It's a terrible thing, right? But it absolutely, the trials force us to adapt. It makes us see the world through a whole new lens, like, unbeknownst to me, and, unprovoked, here I am, I'm sitting in this situation, yet the world doesn't stop. I still got to adjust and make it happen. So I love that. If let's before we go here, I want people to be able to go to that site again. Give us that site where they can check out the one page on growth.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's at matthewpollard.com/growth. And, I would highly recommend people start there. Because for me, if you don't know your niche and you don't know how to articulate it clearly, like, I'm the rapid growth guy, I'm the hustle architect, I'm the China success coach, as opposed to I'm an accountant, I'm a financial planner, then there's only a certain amount we can improve in the sales process. We can still increase your ability to sell, but it's always going to be harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. I'm going to start there today, man. Yeah, I'm going to start there. So, Matthew, so good to have you on today, man. Learned a ton. Love to learn. For everybody out there, please go up, pick up your copy, the Introverts Edge, both in sales, Introverts Edge in networking, both out now. And man, listen, over 150,000 copies sold, I think, right? Like, you're just booming. I see you got 31,000 followers on LinkedIn. You just continue to be a man in demand. So thrilled that you could join us here on the Winners Find a Way show.
It was my absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks for having me on.
For everybody else, thank you for joining us. We'll see you every Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. The Winners Find a Way show. We are live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And you can always catch all of our episodes on your favorite podcasting network. Come check us out. And until next time.